It was a pagan temple, then a synagogue, then a Christian cathedral, then a Crusader fortress, and for centuries, a mosque, all built on the exact same ground. In the city of Gaza, there is a place where every stone tells a different religious story. Roman columns stand beside Islamic arches, and carved into one of those columns is a Jewish menorah, the seven-branched candelabrum, inside a building that for centuries served as one of the most important mosques in the region. But the most intriguing detail is not in the walls, it is beneath the floor. For more than 2,000 years, local tradition has claimed that the bones of Samson, the strongest man in the Bible, are buried under that building. The man who, according to the book of Judges, destroyed an entire temple with his bare hands. And no one has ever confirmed that claim, because no one has ever been allowed to dig there. This place is the Great Mosque of Al-Omari, and its story begins long before Islam, long before Christianity, perhaps even before any sacred text recorded the name of Gaza itself. There is something strange about that particular spot in the city. For more than 3,000 years, every civilization that ruled Gaza built something sacred there. Egyptians, Philistines, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Crusaders, Ottomans, each one arrived, ruled for a time, and rebuilt something over the ruins of what came before, as if that exact piece of land demanded to be sacred. And it was there that the Philistines erected the temple of Dagon. Dagon was the god of grain and fertility, the deity believed to guarantee harvests and survival. Without Dagon, there was no bread, and without bread, there was no life. That is why the temple stood at the center of the city. It was a monumental structure built with massive limestone columns, an open courtyard beneath the sky, and an altar where crowds gathered for offerings and rituals. It is in this temple that the biblical narrative places the final moment of Samson's story. Captured by the Philistines, blinded and chained, he was brought to the temple to be displayed before thousands of people who mocked him. According to the book of Judges, 3,000 Philistines gathered there to celebrate his defeat. They laughed as he stood before them, weak and humiliated. Then Samson asked for one final request. He asked to be guided toward the central columns of the temple so he could rest his hands upon them. And there, touching the stone pillars that held the structure upright, he whispered a final prayer. "Let me die with the Philistines." He took a deep breath and he pushed. The biblical text describes the collapse in only a few lines, but imagine the moment. The grinding sound of stone, the shifting weight of the roof, the screams as the columns gave way. The entire temple collapsed, burying 3,000 people beneath the rubble. 3,000 dead in seconds, and Samson among them. The book of Judges says that he killed more people in that final moment than in all the battles of his life before. But the part of the story that is rarely told comes after that collapse. According to oral traditions preserved in Gaza for more than 2,000 years, Samson's body was buried at the very site where the temple fell. His brothers are said to have retrieved his body from the ruins and buried him beneath the remains of the destroyed temple. And as the centuries passed, as new buildings were constructed over those foundations, as the temple became a church and the church later became a mosque, the body would have remained there, underground. No archaeological excavation has ever confirmed that tradition, and perhaps it never will. The site became one of the most important religious buildings in Gaza, a place impossible to excavate without destroying the structure above it. But perhaps the mystery survived for another reason as well. If the bones were ever discovered there, what would that mean for the three religions that, at different moments in history, considered that place sacred? What claims might emerge? What conflicts might follow? Sometimes the mystery protects more than the answer. And there is another detail that survived the centuries inside that building. A column of white marble nearly 3 meters high. Carved into one side of the stone is the image of a menorah, the seven-branched candelabrum that is one of the most sacred symbols in Judaism. Beneath it is an inscription written in Hebrew, Hananiah, son of Jacob, a name carved in stone nearly 2,000 years ago by someone who wanted to ensure their existence would not be forgotten. That column likely came from a synagogue during the Roman period. When new buildings were constructed in that location, it was reused and reused again. When the building became a Christian church, the column remained. When it later became a mosque, it remained there as well. A Jewish menorah standing inside an Islamic building, and no one ever destroyed it. That detail reveals something remarkable about the history of that place. Over centuries, different religions occupied the same space without completely erasing what had come before. The sacred was not destroyed, it was incorporated. In the 5th century, during the Byzantine period, a large Christian basilica was constructed there, probably dedicated to Saint John the Baptist. The church was significant enough to appear on the famous Madaba map, a 6th century mosaic that depicted the holy cities of the region. Gaza appears clearly on that map, and at its center stands a large church, built on the same ground where the Temple of Dagon once stood. In the year 635, Muslim forces arrived in Gaza. The city did not fall through violence but through negotiation. An agreement was reached. The basilica would be converted into a mosque. Once again, the columns were preserved. Roman columns, Byzantine columns, and even the column bearing the Jewish menorah remained standing. For the builders of the 7th century, these elements were not contradictions, they were foundations. The building became known as the Al-Omari Mosque, named after Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab, who, according to tradition, prayed there personally. For centuries, the mosque flourished. Pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem passed through Gaza. Scholars visited its growing library. The mosque's minaret, rising with a square base and an octagonal tower, became one of the defining landmarks of the city. 5 times a day, the call to prayer echoed through the narrow streets of the old town. But the history of the building was never peaceful for long. In 1099, the Crusaders captured Gaza and converted the mosque into a cathedral. Bells replaced the call to prayer, and Christian frescoes covered the Islamic decoration. For decades, the building functioned once again as a Christian church. Then, in 1187, Saladin defeated the Crusader armies and retook the region. The cathedral became a mosque once more. The bells were removed, the frescoes covered, but the columns once again remained. In 1260, Mongol armies swept through the region, looting and burning cities in their path. Gaza was attacked and parts of the mosque were damaged. Manuscripts were lost, treasures stolen. In 1294, a powerful earthquake toppled the original minaret, yet each time the community rebuilt. In 1355, the famous traveler Ibn Battuta passed through Gaza and described the mosque as majestic, supported by marble columns that reflected the sunlight like mirrors. He did not know that some of those columns came from Roman temples, others from Jewish synagogues, and that beneath the ground he walked there might lie the body of Samson himself. During the Ottoman period, the mosque gained an important library. Rare manuscripts arrived from across the Islamic world, illuminated copies of the Quran decorated with gold and blue ink, treatises by Al-Ghazali on spirituality, works by Ibn Arabi on mysticism, historical chronicles written by scholars in Gaza, texts that existed nowhere else on earth. Over centuries, nearly 3,000 volumes accumulated there. The building survived crusades, Mongol invasions, earthquakes, and even the 2 world wars. In 1917, British bombing raids damaged parts of the structure during the First World War, but it was restored again in 1926. For more than 1,300 years, the mosque stood at the center of Gaza's history. Each generation inherited that building and chose to preserve it. Each generation rebuilt what had been damaged before. And then came December of 2023. In that month, after surviving centuries of conflict, the mosque suffered catastrophic destruction. The minaret that had endured Mongols, Crusaders, earthquakes, and world wars collapsed in seconds. The library caught fire. Ancient manuscripts, some dating back to the 10th century, were consumed by the flames. In just days, a building that had stood for millennia became a field of ruins. Yet even in the middle of destruction, people entered the rubble. Residents searched through the debris with their bare hands, recovering fragments of charred manuscripts and broken pages that still carried legible words. Archaeologists photographed the surviving columns and documented the stones that remained. UNESCO later described the loss as an irreparable blow to humanity's cultural heritage. Not only Muslim heritage, not only Arab heritage, human heritage. Because everything contained within that building belonged to the history of all civilizations that had passed through that land. Today, no one knows exactly what still lies beneath those ruins. Perhaps the column of Hananiah still stands somewhere among the broken stones. Perhaps the ancient foundations of the Temple of Dagon remain buried below the surface, and Samson's bones, if they were ever there, now lie beneath layers of rubble and history. Over thousands of years, each civilization built something new upon that ground. The Temple of Dagon left its foundations, the Romans left their columns, the Byzantines left their walls, the Muslims left the minaret that once defined Gaza's skyline. It was as if that place accumulated layers of faith, belonging to everyone and at the same time to no one permanently. When a place like that disappears, more than stone and wood are lost. The physical evidence that different civilizations once shared the same sacred space disappears as well. The testimony carved into stone that coexistence once existed there vanishes. Today, only fragments remain, pieces of walls, broken columns. But the questions that surrounded that place remain unanswered. What truly lay beneath those foundations? Were Samson's bones ever buried there? Or was the ancient tradition simply humanity's way of explaining why that specific spot in Gaza was always considered sacred? We may never know. Some stories remain powerful precisely because they remain unfinished. The Al-Omari Mosque stood for more than 13 centuries and survived nearly everything history threw at it. Perhaps its true lesson lies not only in its destruction, but in what it revealed while it still stood. For centuries, different faiths passed through that place, and each of them left something behind.